Good evening, everyone. Welcome to OHEL's webinar celebrating Chanukah in a time of war. Can there be light in darkness? We're very honored to have distinguished panelists, Rabbi Ivan Yitzchak Eisenman and Dr. Norman Blumenthal. We will come back to you in 1 minute as we wait for individuals to join us on this webinar. We'll see you in just 1 moment, everyone. Hi, good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. This is David Mandel at OHEL, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this evening's webinar celebrating Chanukah in a time of war. Can there be light in darkness? I first would like to thank our colleagues at OHEL, Tzivi Ryder and Cheryl Chernovsky and Laura Bart, who organize our webinars and make this possible to so many individuals locally, nationally, internationally on these conversations. We invite everyone to ask your questions on the chat function that you can do privately or for others to see. Following a discussion by our panelists, we will get to as many of your questions as possible. How can we celebrate while holding the pain of our fellow Jews? Can grief and joy coexist in the holiday celebration of Hanukkah? What, if anything, should we be doing different this year? I'm struck by a headline in one of the national Jewish newspapers, a well-read paper that posed the following question in its headline today: should American Jews hide their identities? This is where we are, that we are asking this question in the year 2023. Rabbi Ivan Yitzchak Eisenman is a Rav in Congregation Ahavas Yisrael since 1997. His warmth, charisma, active involvement in community issues have not only enabled the shul to grow significantly, it has also made him a beloved Rav in the entire Passaic Clifton community. Rav Eisenman successfully disseminates Torah thought, both orally and in written form. His bi-weekly column for Mishpacha magazine, which I look forward to reading, has become a staple for thousands of families worldwide. He's an accomplished author. He's released 3 books to date, and I've had the privilege of listening to Rabbi Eisenman over the past 20 years. Very happy to welcome Rabbi Eisenman this evening for a conversation, and then we will introduce Dr. Norman Blumenthal. Rabbi Eisenman, how are you? How is your family?
Thank you so much, Dr. Mandel, and thank you so much for that very warm and unearned but appreciated introduction. Thank God I'm okay, and I welcome you back, you and your wife. I know we're in Eretz Yisrael. I'm sure it was difficult to return, but it's nice to see you.
Thank you.
So I guess we'll jump right into the remarks. So first of all, I always like to say as a disclaimer, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not a therapist by education. I don't have any degrees in therapy, and certainly I defer to the experts, Dr. Mandel in his years at OL and Dr. Blumenthal in his career, and the other great therapists. I just come from my side of the desk of experience as a Rav. So the topic of celebrating Chanukah in this midst, I was giving it a lot of thought today. And on one hand, which I have a saying which I've often said to the shul, never say never and never say always. I'm a very big advocate of one size never fits all. There's no such thing in dealing with emotions of one size fitting all. And I think we have to realize from the start that there are certain people who are much more impacted on what has occurred since October 7th. And to some extent, I think they have to be given their space, and we have to value their expression, and we have to value their feelings if they so choose to limit their perhaps a celebration. On the other hand, obviously there's those individuals who have, again, it's not that they're not impacted and it's not that they're not sad, but perhaps they're, for whatever reasons they have better coping skills. Perhaps they are better at compartmentalizing, and their ability to perhaps celebrate, or their want to celebrate, I think as well should be respected as well. So I think that's point number one, is that we have to respect everybody in their situation. There may be family gatherings, which we certainly don't want a family gathering to dissolve into some sort of disunity. And I think there should be enough room at the table and a big enough tent that those who perhaps feel the need to perhaps refrain from perhaps the usual amount of celebrating should be respected, and those who feel the ability or the want to celebrate full, perhaps they should be respected as well. There's no one answer here that is the correct answer, and there's no one size that fits all. Nevertheless, I'd like to give some thoughts that came into my mind with regard to this year on Hanukkah. Again, being sometimes I've been accused of being a contrarian, and there may be some truth to that. But honestly, I'm going to start from the opposite end. Before I have a few remarks on celebrating in crisis, I just want to comment on the idea of crisis while celebrating, namely that as my shul and as most shuls, we've begun to add on extra chapters of Tehillim after davening, concluding with Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael. I have to admit that now that we are past the Shloshim and more since the horrific massacre of October 7th, I have unfortunately, and such is the way of people, but I've unfortunately noticed people sometimes heading to the exits already halfway through Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, as opposed to the first few weeks where the fervor, the passion, the intent was clearly noticed and everybody was more glued to their seats. So I think on the first point, I think that we as parents or adults or whoever we are, that if we are setting the tone, I think it's critical that we don't lose sight of the crisis, which I think honestly, well, the coping methods that we have as we're reaching now 6-7 weeks past the crisis is that I think it would be beautiful to begin any sort of Hanukkah celebration with a mention of the crisis, with a chapter of Tehillim or two. And I think that should be prominent, and we shouldn't forget about that. As Dr. Mandel properly said, we may not be feeling it so much in our insular neighborhoods of Monsey, Passaic, Brooklyn, and Lakewood, but certainly in other parts of the country, they're certainly feeling it much more directly, that we are in a sense of crisis. So I think that should be not forgotten. With regard to those who are dealing with the pain itself, so just a few thoughts came to my mind. You know, it's interesting, there's a Gemara, the Gemara tells us that there was a woman who, Chazal actually told us the first 3 days of Shiva is for crying, and the next 4 days are more mourning, and then there's a 30-day period, and only for one's parents do we have the year-long mourning. And Chazal actually tell us a story of a woman who refused to stop crying, and unfortunately, she suffered more. Chazal warned there's a limit to one's mourning, and past that limit, one is actually acting improperly. So notwithstanding, I did state that everybody has their own unique reaction, but I do believe that we all have the ability, hopefully some need more strength than others, but to compartmentalize and cope, and to recognize that there is always, that we're a people who are resilient, and there's always hope. And honestly, even the horrific massacre has occurred, but we already see signs that there is signs of rebuilding. Hostages are returning. Hopefully, again, what will be in the future, nobody knows, but the hostages returning, over 100 already, not all Jews, but 100 returning is certainly good news. And also, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that even the Hanukkah miracle itself, when it occurred historically, although it did return religious freedom and a functioning Beis Mikdash, it did not free the Jews from the Greek-Syrian domination. The Jews retained and remained under this Greek-Syrian domination for another 25 years, and even after they won their independence, it was short-lived, as we know that the Romans were only after about 60, 70 years of the Jewish, the Hasmonean state, the Romans returned. But nevertheless, we celebrate. We celebrate what we have achieved. We celebrate what we have achieved as the sense of light amidst the darkness. So I think that's a theme we have to focus on. There is celebration. There are weddings taking place. There are people getting engaged. There are babies being born, and Jewish life does go on. And that's something that we have to celebrate. And that's something that we have to always focus on. In Yafa Eliak's classic book, which it's my chosen reading for many, many years on Tisha B'Av, but I think it's a worthwhile, extremely worthwhile book to be read any day of the year, which is Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust, a classic written by Yafa Eliak, which is basically, by the way, a semi-biography of the Bluzhev Rebbe, who spent 5 years in concentration and work camps And the only daughter that he has, one killed in the Holocaust, and even though he remarried, the two children that he did eventually raise were not his biological children. But at one point, she tells him the story of how after everything he suffered, and he saw his only daughter and his only granddaughter murdered by the Nazis, and he saw his first wife murdered by the Nazis. She records in the story that later on his adopted son, who is presently the Bluzhev Rebbe, he actually, when he got married in England. As he was walking his son down the aisle, he said, "Who could have imagined when I came out of the camps that one day I'd be walking a son down the aisle?" Now, it wasn't his biological son, and he knew it wasn't his biological son, but he had that resiliency and that recognition to realize that stories don't always end the exact way we want, but there is hope. There is a future. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a future for the Jewish people. We've constantly seen that. And as the Bluzhev Rebbe was able to realize, yes, it may not the way he thought it would be in 1940, 1939 when the war began, but he was able to appreciate him being able to see a continuity of the Jewish people, albeit taking his son, who adopted, but he viewed as a son, down to the chuppah. And I think, honestly, that is something how we have to look. Hanukkah is a time of celebration. Hanukkah is the time of resiliency. Hanukkah is a time of hope. And what greater hope, what greater sense of hope, resiliency can we have than by celebrating Hanukkah? So therefore, again, I think we have to keep paramount in our minds the crisis at hand, but I think simultaneously we have to hold on to the joy, and certainly having our family together is even an opportunity for greater of ability of unity. I just want to conclude with one quick anecdote. As a rabbi, contrary to what, notwithstanding Rabbi Dr. Mandel's so laudatory remarks about myself, as a rabbi, rabbis can get into disagreements with people. And recently, somebody reconnected with me from the shul who was somewhat estranged for a number of years. And we reconnected in a very meaningful fashion. And when I asked them why, they said, since October 7th, I realized that how many petty things in this world, how petty they really are. And they made that effort to reconnect, and that moved me greatly. And I think that could be a lesson for all of us this Hanukkah. We're all normal. We all have our family petty disagreements. If anything, this Hanukkah could be a time for unity, a time for reconciliation, a time for reunification, a time to invite that relative who, whatever, has been somewhat estranged from the family. And I think we can take the crisis and make it into a time of connection, of turn crisis into connection. I think that would be a beautiful celebration of Hanukkah.
Well, Eisenman, as you mentioned, I just had the privilege of returning yesterday from Israel after a few days there, and it's such a difficult time, but at the same time, it's such an inspiring time to see so many people from around the world come and do whatever they're doing to help support. And, everyone knows that every single taxi driver in Israel is a prime minister. And every taxi driver that I encountered, and literally every single one, has a son in Gaza, has a daughter serving, every single one. And everyone was so positive, realist, understanding, and just believing. They have to believe. They have to believe. It's a time of crisis, and they have to believe. And it doesn't make a difference what political persuasion, what age. It's really what you said so aptly in your conversation, that everyone has to respect those who want to celebrate and respect those who don't, and recognize that during difficult times, people respond in different ways. Hanukkah is a time that everyone In addition to lighting candles, it's customary to give out presents, gifts, especially to children. And I'm taken by your words when you say, either before or after you light the Hanukkah candles, however you celebrate, you sing, you give gifts, whatever you do, say a tefillah, say a prayer, whatever you want to do, say a formal prayer, say some words, recognize what's going on, include what's going on in Israel into your Hanukkah celebration. Make that part of your evening. Thank you very much. Looking forward to coming back to a conversation in a few minutes with some questions, thoughts that people had. Dr. Norman Blumenthal, my colleague at OHEL, a licensed clinical psychologist, serves as director of trauma services at the OHEL Zacta Family National Trauma Center. Dr. Blumenthal is adjunct professor at the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary and the Furkov Graduate School of Psychology, both at Yiv University. He's often consulted in the aftermath of catastrophic events and presents on numerous topics: parenting, grief, trauma, suicide, anxiety, divorce, parental alienation, and group psychotherapy. And Dr. Blumenthal also has a private practice in Cedarhurst. Dr. Blumenthal, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much. And I also was reminded as you were speaking about what many people say, that the biggest problem for Israel, that they've never had a prime minister who was once a cab driver, because they seem to have the answers to all the problems. It's really a great honor to share this podium with Rabbi Eisenman, who always has an innovative message, but I don't think it's contrarian, because he's creative and he has chidushim all within the rubric and within the umbrella of Torah values and the Torah perspective. And it's really a great honor to share the podium with him. And I also want to thank David Mandel, who our CEO and our presidium of Mel Zacta and Jay Kastenbaum, who make it possible for us to do these webinars. I attended Yiv University in the mid-70s. And I guess I had the privilege of being there at the same time that our spiritual leader, Rav Yoshe Soloveitchik, was there. I was never zocha to be in his shir. I was never strong enough in learning, although I had some incredible rebbeim. But I was able to attend many of his public lectures and to hear him speak and just be in his presence. And I remember when he would give his public lectures, it was quite an experience. We'd have to get there an hour and a half early just to get a seat. And, he would walk in and lecture for 3 hours straight. And it was one of the few times in my life where I really felt that time stood still, because I would look at my watch and I couldn't believe an hour and a half had already passed. And it was a survey of all of Torah and all of knowledge, basically. There was Gemaras, Bavli, Yerushalmi. He would cite the Sifrei Musar, Tanakh. He seamlessly switched to philosophy, to English literature, to history, to science. And sometimes, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but sometimes I was a young college kid, and I would look at him and I would say, his hat size is not bigger than mine. Where are all those brains? How is there so much more in there than what I have, when I think I even had a bigger head size than his? And I'm sure there's a biological explanation for that eludes me, but the brain is a very big place, and there's much we can do with it. And I think what I'd like to talk about, remaining within the rubric as a mental health professional, is what we can do with our brains to make this a very special Chanukah. First of all, as Rabbi Eisenman alluded to, we have a capacity to hold on to different emotions and different mental states simultaneously, even if if they were to be put together, would be contradictory. And we call it compartmentalizing, that we can compartmentalize our thinking. And that's very much a part of life. And it's certainly going to be a part of life in some extreme circumstances. We at the trauma team have had situations of people, lo aleinu, who lost children very suddenly, and were sitting Shiva, and then literally within a week afterwards had the wedding of a sibling of that child, and had to somehow or another hold on to their very legitimate grief, and at the same time celebrate with joy. I remember once saying to one of these families during the Shiva that, when you walk down the aisle, you're going to cry your eyes out. When the band starts playing that loud noise and says, "Welcome for the first time, Mr. and Mrs.," you're going to dance your feet off. And kachaya, that's actually what happened. But it's also a part of ordinary life as well. It's interesting that our rabbis recognize that. And at the most joyous occasion, under the chuppah, we put ashes on the forehead of the chassan and sing a Meshkachei Yerushalayim. During when we read Megillah Esther, we lapse into Eicha melodies. And we don't say Tachanun on Tisha B'Av because it's a Yom Tov. In fact, I just had the schus this past Shabbos to celebrate the bar mitzvah of a grandson, and during my speech, I referenced my mother's experiences in the Nazi concentration camps, and my very funny son came up to me after and said, with the Blumenthal's, it's not a celebration if we don't reference the Holocaust. But yeah, it's we keep those mixed emotions, and we do so, as I said, even in ordinary life. Let's even before October 7th, and even if nothing so melodramatic is happening, we all have, our lives are mixed. We all have parts of our lives that are bringing us great joy, and we have parts of our life that are causing us sorrow and which we're distressed about. And somehow we can hold on to both of them. And when we can access the celebration, we can access the pain. And when we have to put both away and do our jobs, we're able to do it. So we can do the same thing on this Chanukah. We can be cognizant of the almost unthinkable pain and suffering of especially of those hostages, and especially for those who have lost so much during these atrocities. On the other hand, we can recognize the Nes Chanukah, the remarkable miracle, and the joyous celebration of the rejuvenation of the Beis Hamikdash, as Rabbi Reisman described. There's another thing we can do with those very big brains we have, which is that we can attach meaning to different events. Now, attaching meaning doesn't mean create a meaning that is not there. The basic meaning, the basic core and foundation of our Yom Tovim are dictated to us by Chazal. But within that, we have Elbaro. And we can infuse the celebrations and the commemorations with themes and with insights that we have gained from the crisis that we're in the middle of, both the crisis in Israel and the virulent anti-Semitism here in America. I'm going to share a personal one that I was thinking about that I might be using in 2 weeks when we're celebrating Chanukah. I'm a child of Holocaust survivor and a refugee, so I'm really this first generation post-Holocaust. And when I was 8 years old, my oldest cousin, Steve Levison, who grew up in Denver, but at that time Denver didn't have a yeshiva high school, so he went to TA Baltimore for high school. He was accepted into Harvard. And I remember as an 8-year-old child, I was brimming with pride that just my first cousin, the oldest cousin in the family, was accepted to Harvard University. And that he's going to be walking on that campus and attending classes with his yarmulke and with his tzitzis. I couldn't have been more enthused. When I look at Harvard today, I really think he would have been better off going to Hoboken Community College than to Harvard. One of the very difficult nisyonos, challenges, what we're going through is not only just the meteoric rise of anti-Semitism and the overt violent anti-Semitism and the silence and tolerance of college presidents and of much of the media, is that this is not coming from some crime-ridden neighborhood, from some impoverished, disenfranchised subsets of the population. This hatred is coming from our most elite universities and from the most respected news media. And this is terribly disheartening. And I will tell even you personally, besides, it's obvious I mentioned that I went to Yiv University and my children went there, and I was a firm believer in Torah Mada. My father himself hailed from Germany and went to the Reala Shul of Samson Folhurst, steeped in the tradition of Torah and Derech Eretz. This is very much a part of my background. And then to see this is terribly disheartening. In fact, I'm reminded of the story that Beryl Wine cites in his book when the Satmar Rav used to visit Miami. and they would get together. And one time, Beryl Wine asked him if he would speak to his high school. And the Satmar Rav asked, do they have English studies? And Beryl Wine said, yes. So he told them, as he often did, a story. He said he talked about a guy who went to a restaurant and ordered a bowl of soup. And afterwards, he called over the waiter and he said, next time you serve the soup, have one bowl for the soup and one bowl for the flies. And it's funny. But I remember when I first read it, I scoffed at that. I mean, it just was so foreign to me. It's starting to make a lot of sense. And when I think, for me, lighting the Chanukah candles at night is in a way sort of saying that our little light, our light of Torah knowledge and our values are going to be lighting up this very dark period. And in a way of sort of saying that, yes, that our chachma and our traditions so are in such sharp contrast to what we're seeing in the world around us. Now, maybe that's very much a personal matter, and maybe it has a lot of personal meaning, but again, it's taking that symbolism and infusing it with a message that is very timely. A lot of people have been asking about this, and I think, do we detract from, and Rav Eisen had alluded to it, do we limit, do we somehow minimize our simcha, because there's so much suffering out there. And I think what we have to do, and which makes sense to me psychologically, is, yes, we can do some gestures. We can even sort of visit the trauma and the horror of those who are in Gaza tunnels. But we don't bury ourselves. We can't in it. And I mean, we're not going to hire people to come and kidnap us and keep us 50 days in a tunnel so we can connect our brethren in Israel. But we can do something. We can take some measure. We can make this a slightly different Hanukkah because the times are different. I will share with you what we decided to do in my family, and I'd love to take credit for it, but it was really my wife's doing, who is 20 times the psychologist that I am. We were thinking about, typically on Hanukkah, we have all the family over with grandchildren and everything. We have a gift for each grandchild. And then on MofShabas, we have some very big events. We had the Simon Says person come. We had the game shows. We do something, something a little more, very celebratory. At first, we were thinking maybe we'll skip that MofShabas part this year, because we'll just have a regular party. We won't have such a special party. But the kids still look forward to it, and the kids. We didn't want to take it away from them. And then my wife came up with a wonderful idea, which we've shared with others, and other people are adopting it, so I'll share it here. So we decided that this year we're not going to buy the kids gifts, but this Sunday we're going to take the kids we're going to get together, we're going to take the grandkids to a toy store. And each one of them will buy a toy for their age to be given to some contemporary of theirs in Israel. We'll give them the money to buy something, a toy or maybe a sweatshirt or something special that they would value, to give to one of those displaced Israelis. In fact, one of our nephews is right across the street from a hotel where there are many displaced Israelis in the south, and we're going to try to get it to him to give to those children. And we're going to take it back to the house, and we're going to gift wrap them, and everybody's going to write a note. And we already arranged. We found someone who's going for Hanukkah who will take it for us. So we're celebrating. We're having the very special MofShabas event. We're going to get together as a family. We're going to sing. We're going to, enjoy Hanukkah. But this Hanukkah will be different than the other Hanukkahs in some small way, where actually the children are going to be. We're going to teach them to forego something that they wanted, to share with somebody in a less fortunate position. Again, please feel free to we don't have a copyright on this, and please feel free to do the same. And then I think one last point is that every Jewish holiday, it points not only to events that occurred in the past, but point us to the future as well. And point us to an awareness that Hashem is running the world. And while it is perplexing to us often what happens, we are headed in the right direction. We're headed towards something greater and to the ultimate good. And no matter how dark it is outside, there is a reason to have light. I often mention that my mother used to tell me that she survived Auschwitz by watching the sunset. And I often think, why did Hashem make the sunset so beautiful? Hashem could have had a black and white sunset. Why did he create a sunset that's so beautiful? And I think it's because as we go into the darkness of night, Hashem wants to remind us how beautiful the world can be. And I think that's another thought that we can have as we light Hanukkah candles, that even though it is very, very dark, maybe it's one of the darkest Hanukkahs, certainly in our lifetime, that our light, there's a light there and we can light up that darkness a bit. You know, there's the famous quote, I believe it's from the Chavos HaLevavos, that Ma'at min ha'or docha harbei min ha'choshech, which is that a small light in a dark room illuminates more than it does in a light room. In fact, in psychology, we call it Fechner's law. Fechner was a perceptual psychologist who studied, actually measured how dark the room could be and how much that light could illuminate. And that's really what the Hanukkahs, I'm hoping, will be for us and for everyone, as a reminder that even in the darkest periods, we have a small light. We represent a small light, but that illuminates greatly.
Thank you, Dr. Blumenthal. I had a mentor who taught me that at times life's most complex questions have easy answers, but we always look for complex answers when the easy ones can do. We have a complex question tonight. Can there be light in darkness? Celebrating Hanukkah in time of war. Rabbi Eisenman opened up by saying one size never fits all. Respect those who want to celebrate and those who don't. And you, Dr. Blumenthal, opened up by saying you can cry your heart out and 5 minutes later you can dance your feet off in the same situation. You gave a context of a wedding, but it can be anywhere. It can be anywhere. You had a simcha, you had a celebration, and you talked about your family situation of the show of the Holocaust, and your son said to you, you know, Abba, you know, Dad, there doesn't seem to be any Blumenthal celebration without discussing the show of the Holocaust. Well, of course, if you're a child of survivors, that's what you were brought up with. And it brings to mind that October 7th, the day October 7th, may now equate with Hey Eir, with Israel's Independence Day. That October 7th may now equate with Yom HaZikaron. Yom HaZikaron, the siren, where everybody stops, regardless of where they are in Israel, and stands for a minute to remember the 6 million, not to remember the 6 million, to remember all the fallen soldiers from all the wars, will now include October 7th. So yes, we need to remember all those things. And at the same time, we also want to celebrate, because we can't live in darkness. We have to live in light in order to go on. And as Rabbi Eisenman said, that's why you have 7 days of Shiva and 30 days in a year for certain people. You have to be able to go on. We have a number of questions that people asked. Rabbi Eisenman, Dr. Blumenthal, let's go to some of the questions. First of all, there was a comment that Dr. Blumenthal, your suggestion about gifts, that children should buy gifts to other people, so they should learn that they're sharing and not necessarily only have for themselves. Somebody wrote in that it's a great suggestion. Thank you. You've already, that's it. One person took your suggestion. That's good enough. So a question. Rabbi Eisenman, a person commented, I so want to believe that everything will be good in Israel, that everything will be good, but I'm afraid I'm going to be disappointed. Please help me deal with the possibility of being disappointed, Rabbi Eisenman.
Well, that's obviously a very difficult question. I mean, I'll begin by saying that I have 3 married sons in Israel. One of them is on the front lines right now. He was one of the 360,000 reservists who's called up, and obviously it's a quite trying trying for my wife and myself during this time period, and never know when the phone rings. But I think one answer to that question is the idea of everything will be all right. I think sometimes we're fooled by different reasons, maybe not the proper venue to why that is. But I think the reality is that we somehow have been perhaps educated in a perhaps imprecise way, or perhaps other reasons, but that we sort of have this belief that if I believe it, or I have enough bitachon, I have enough trust, then things will come out the way I want them to be. And that's not, at least certainly according to the Chazon Ish, that's not what life is. The Chazon Ish writes that bitachon, true trust in Hashem, is not that I believe things will be right, then things will be right. True trust in Hashem is the belief that He is running the world, and whatever cards I'm dealt with, it's my obligation to take those cards and use those cards and utilize them in the best way possible. Most probably things will never come out the exact way we hoped, we thought, we planned, we dreamed. But that doesn't mean that's not necessarily bad. It means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, obviously his ways are hidden from us. And our job, I think, to stressing bitachon is not to stress to people that don't worry, things will be all right. Honestly, until there's some sort of tchias hamesim of resurrection of the dead, the 1,200 or 1,400 or whatever the current figure is of those Jews who were murdered on October 7th are not coming back. And frankly, those who we have no idea of, even the hostage situation of if everyone is going to be returned. I think a perhaps a more realistic approach is the recognition that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the show, and he has his ideas of running the show. They are different often than we would like, but our job is to do what's right. And what's right is to not just Torah and mitzvahs, which of course, but to show a sense of unity. You know, it's interesting. I would just want to mention, as Dr. Blumenthal and yourself were speaking, you know, we don't have to look for alternative themes this year for Chanukah. This is the one year, because of the precarious situation we find ourselves, we could focus on Chanukah without any other alternative theme. Think about it. The Jews during Chanukah, they were in a very precarious situation. They were under worse anti-Semitic decrees than we've ever seen. Every Jewish girl who had to be married had to be violated prior to a wedding. Bris Milah was outlawed. The Torah study was outlawed. Shabbos was outlawed. I mean, honestly, what we're facing now pales in comparison to the decrees that they had to deal with. And at the end of the day, not that much changed on that day, Chof Hei Kislev, on that one day. Rather, there was a sense of hope. There was a sense of hope. In fact, the commentators point out that the Gemara is very careful. It says, Lashana Acheres. The next year, they decided to declare it a holiday. Not that year immediately after the miracle, only the next year. Why? Because they realized that things weren't perfect, but things did continue. Things continued. Life did continue. And even now in Israel, as we speak, life has continued. And that's something that we have to celebrate. I don't think it's healthy to think that things will go back to October 6th. They're not. I mean, obviously Hashem could do anything in a messianic era, but the way things usually are, you know, nothing. The world never went back to August 29th, 1939. It never went back, but rather our job is to take from like the Blumenthal family, take what they had and to rebuild, and to take, and I think we're already starting to rebuilding the unity which is being seen in Klal Yisrael, as opposed to focusing on what we want to happen. I think it's more critical to focus on what we should be doing or what we should be creating to happening right now. And what we should be creating is a sense of caring for our brethren. I just want to stress again, when I was at that march in Washington on Tuesday, on Rosh Chodesh Kislev, it was one of the most uplifting experiences in my entire life, specifically because I was surrounded by overwhelmingly Jews who were not Orthodox, who were Jews who we had written off, Jews who came from Dallas and Detroit and Los Angeles. I met a man there who took an Uber for $900 to be there because the bus that they hired refused to take them when they found out where they were going. These were Jews who we sort of wrote them off. They're secularized, they're Americanized, they're leftist, who knows what they are. And they say, no, we're Jews too. It's an unbelievable opportunity for us to reconnect, for us to re-strengthen ourselves, for us to unify. So again, I don't think it's positive to try to recreate the past. I think it's much more positive to try to build a better future, and I think that's a more of a healing message.
I want the listening audience and the hundreds of individuals that will be listening and watching this recording afterwards to just take a breath about what Rabbi Eisenman said, that as difficult as it is to absorb the events of October 7th and the conversation that's going on today about the hostages, that we have lived through times that have been much more difficult, whether it was the time of the miracles of Chanukah. That day, we still, for 25 years afterwards, were persecuted by the Romans and the Greeks, or the Shoah, or everything else. That as difficult as it is today, we have prevailed in much more difficult circumstances. And you need to take a breath and absorb that context, because it's a critically important message. Dr. Blumenthal, speak to parents, please, whose children at various ages are going to be asking them the question, we're celebrating Hanukkah? All I see on social media is anti-Semitism and everything that's going on and all the things that's going on in Israel. And I hear mommy and daddy talking about it. How are we celebrating Hanukkah?
Well, first of all, as long as you mention social media, I think if your children are on social media, it behooves parents and educators to teach them how to use it responsibly and how to have ownership over it, not let it own them. And you are bombarded by a plethora of news sources and everybody trying to out sensationalize the next one. So it's an opportunity to teach our children to know where you're getting your information from and how to preserve your sense of perspective. And I think it's also a good opportunity to remind children that it's distorting perhaps the perception of how many enemies we have, how many friends we have. And it's still, I know that anti-Semitism is at its highest rate, but still the majority of Americans support Israel. And we have many, many friends, and the president has been very supportive of Israel as well. So it's not like, this is not Kristallnacht, and the whole world isn't turning against us. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to teach our children as well. A lot of what Roy Eisman has so eloquently said, which is that life goes on, and we're not going to deprive ourselves of our rich history and what Hanukkah represents in terms of our capacity to rebuild. Again, we've referenced in the Holocaust. Look what we've rebuilt since then. So an opportunity to rebuild and re-sanctify our lives. So it's really a golden opportunity both to give them the proper perspective, how to view news, and also how to teach them that time-honored Jewish tradition of going on, seeking out life and seeking out even that which we have to celebrate during frightening times.
There's so much conversation about all the help that people are giving to Israel right now, to the soldiers, to the army bases. So many people have the capacity to give a lot of money, to do a lot of things, and not everybody does. And I've spoken to a number of people who are wondering, what can I do? How can I contribute? And I just want to comment that everyone can contribute in their way. The whole notion of giving tzedakah, of contributing, is at your level. No one is asking people to contribute more than their level. So you're not in competition with those individuals that are building tents with so many things, or making barbecues for soldiers, or hosting so many things, or contributing significant sums of money. In whatever way people can contribute that makes you feel meaningful, people can do that. Rabbi Eisman spoke about saying a prayer, saying a tefillah, saying Tehillim. You don't have to say the whole Tehillim every single day. Whatever you do, that's the conversation you can have with your family also, in the same way that Dr. Blumenthal suggested about children buying gifts. And I would posit that that's one conversation you can have on the first night of Hanukkah or beforehand. How should this family contribute to the war effort in Israel? I like to mention my brother-in-law, Louis Oliver Shalom, during one of the wars. His Rosh Yeshiva of Gusman sent the boys to an army base to wash dishes, or send the boys to a hospital to wash dishes, because everyone was called up to Miluim to serve, and there wasn't anyone to wash dishes. And my brother-in-law spoke about it for many years. People can wash dishes, and it contributes to the effort. Rabbi Eisenman, tell us one more time about the ability. You spoke about compartmentalization. Tell us again about the ability for one part of our soul, our heart, our brain, to feel happy, while another part of it feels sad, or that it's okay just to feel happy without necessarily feeling guilty.
Yeah. So I think here, I think honestly, Chazal themselves, they gave us the perfect example. Chazal teach us, the Gemara in the concluding chapter of Brachas of the 9th parak tells that if a person has found out, if someone is told that their father was just deceased, yet the family just inherited a large amount of money. So the Talmud says at that time they make two brachas. They make the bracha of Dayan Ha'emes, meaning God, you are the ultimate judge, although we would rather have our father live. And they make the bracha Hatov HaMitiv. You are the God who is good and does good to others. You benefit and you benefit many others. How can Chazal say these two brachas exist simultaneously? So I don't even know. I mean, I'm sure Dr. Blumenthal could explain it from more of a psychological perspective, but I'm not even sure I need the clinical perspective. I think human emotions themselves are nuanced enough to be able to recognize the tragedy when it happens and to feel the tragedy, but simultaneously to recognize the good of when it happens. I had the opportunity just today, a few hours ago, to meet with a family. I'm being vague on purpose to preserve their confidentiality, and I believe Dr. Blumenthal had contact with them at certain times as well. They suffered a tremendous tragedy, which no one of us should ever know. I can't say that that everything is great in their life, but that tragedy was also the catalyst for them to embark upon certain educational programs in the institution where the person who they lost attended, which never would have happened. And I could see as the mother was speaking, her sense of loss is not leaving her. However, her sense simultaneously of pride of what she accomplished is honestly is equally present. And I want to stress something else, which I often tell and to people when I'm with them. Often I'm with people, as you mentioned, feeling guilt. People who are at their loved one is at the end of days. Just today, somebody called me that their father is already, looks like it's a matter of hours. And we all know that no one knows the time of death. And often when I'm with families and it lingers on longer than the doctors perhaps thought, I tell them privately, of course, there's nothing wrong. I know that you're feeling a certain amount of relief. I know you're feeling grief, and I know you're feeling sadness, but I know you're only feeling a certain amount of relief as well. The vigils in the all-night vigils in the hospital, the constant calls from the hospital to come again and again, the decisions which had to be made, the gut-wrenching family conferences, and the Tehillim, which was seemingly endless. It's natural, and there's nothing to be ashamed of or even feel guilty, that yes, death does bring a sense of relief, and that relief was recognized even by Chazal. Remember, the Talmud in Ksubis tells us that Rebbe, the great Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi, perhaps the greatest, the author of the Mishnah, when he was dying and the sages were davening, and their davening was so powerful that somehow it kept the angel of death at bay, his maidservant, who ostensibly was not a Jewish woman, she broke a plate, and the shattering of the plate, that ceased their davening for a moment and allowed the angel of death to finally take the life of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. The Gemara records that statement as honestly as complimentary, as laudatory about her. She did the right thing, meaning that death in and of itself is an inevitable part of life. And yes, there is some, people do feel a certain relief in certain situations. So here as well, I don't think there's anything to feel guilty about, that it's Hanukkah. And Hanukkah represents joy and represents resilience and represents more than any other year. This year, our Hanukkah is the time of we see light. And there's nothing wrong with embracing that light. And I don't think anyone should feel guilty at all by having that feeling that of hope, of joy, of celebration. Notwithstanding, simultaneously, we're very much aware of the crisis that so many of ourselves are going through as well.
Once again, Rabbi Eisenman, people need to pause and really absorb your message this evening, this conversation. We are accustomed to, when we see police officers or veterans of war, anyone, we're accustomed to making a statement, a brief statement, by saying thank you for your service. During this time, when we have tens of thousands of Israeli soldiers, 18, 19, 20 years old, and as you mentioned, 360,000 reservists throughout the country, the words thank you for your service don't even begin to measure what everyone is facing, the difficulty. So speaking about Hanukkah, we want to take a moment for everyone that's listening who has a child, a niece, a nephew, a cousin, a brother, serving in the Israeli army, serving in the reserves, to say to them and to the relative thank you, and to say to them that they should be safe and come home safely and whole, and to say to them that you all wish for a Hanukkah miracle, that this war should end quickly and end well, and that everyone can in some way celebrate with their family member including those who we know who are lone soldiers in Israel. Rabbi Eisenman, Dr. Blumenthal, it's been a privilege for me to listen to the two of you this evening. Following this conversation, everyone will be invited to complete a brief questionnaire that will take you a moment so that we can see how we can continue to serve the public with the best conversation. And this will also be available for people to download in the next day or two. Rabbi Eisenman, we wish you and your wife and your congregation, your Kehillah, well. Dr. Blumenthal, we wish you and your wife and your family well. And everyone listening, everyone should have a very, very happy Chanukah. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.